So the question is, when is Uncle Sam going to default on his debts? Inevitably, the U.S. is going to have to either outright default or restructure debt payments. Um, Basically, every country in existence has. There's only a few modern countries that haven't, and those are Norway, Canada, New Zealand, Switzerland, and Singapore. Um, and I would argue that they probably just haven't been given enough time or been put in a position such as like a world reserve currency status where it almost becomes inevitably that large enough debts build up that just don't get repaid. You can kind of see that from the progression of countries that were the primary world reserve currency holders. And that starts out with Portugal, moving to Spain, then the Netherlands, and then France, and then Britain, and finally the United States. Each of those currency regimes lasted roughly 100 years, and here in the US, we're probably kind of on the tail end of that. You can just see these enormous debts building up. I think partially because we are the world reserve currency, so we have to run kind of deficits to allow the rest of the world access to dollars, which they can transact with. Um, so, and it's also interesting too that when you look at the U.S., we've already defaulted on our debts 4 times before in history. Interesting article from The Hill states that the first time the U.S. government defaulted was in 1862 on demand notes, and it says was caused by the Treasury's financial difficulty trying to pay for the Civil War, and this led them to institute greenbacks, which then they printed to fund the war, and were greatly devalued relative to gold. The second time the U.S. government defaulted was in 1933, defaulted on gold bonds, where the terms promised bondholders to redeem these bonds in gold. Apparently, this case went to the Supreme Court, which the Supreme Court upheld the sovereign's power of the government to default if it chose to, stating, "The government, through exercise of its sovereign power, has rendered itself immune from liability." And the third time the government defaulted was in 1968 by refusing to honor its explicit promise to redeem its silver certificate papers for silver dollars. And the fourth time the U.S. government defaulted was in 1971, breaking the government's commitment to redeem dollars held by foreign governments for gold under the Bretton Woods Agreement. So I think, given the history, it's fair to assume that there's probably a fifth default coming, and what that default looks like and how it will affect the purchasing power of the dollar is an interesting point to consider. I think it's wise to take a more diversified approach to assets, some more international exposure, some precious metals exposure, some commodities exposure, just owning some more real assets. But yeah, I guess just wanted to share that. Don't know what anyone's thoughts are on the matter and what you're doing to protect yourself in the event that the U.S. government is forced to default or restructure its debts yet again. But yeah, good talking to you, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.